thank you for coming. This evening, I'd like to talk about my company. Hi everyone and welcome to Learning English with Oxford. Now you've just watched the beginning of a presentation. It was quite a formal presentation. You can have formal presentations and informal presentations, but there's a really safe way to structure them. So if you get nervous before a presentation and you worry about the type of language you're going to use, then this video will help. Good morning everyone and thanks for coming. Today I'd like to talk about the product launch. Maybe you give presentations already, maybe in your workplace, for your studies. Why not tell us in the comments below? The point is there's a really safe way to structure a presentation. There are different ways of doing presentations, but I'm going to give you a fairly safe way to start. And the best starting point is to introduce what you're going to talk about. Hi everyone, sorry about this, it's short notice. I know you're all busy, but I've got the figures through for the first quarter. So I want to talk about the results. So in the three different presentations you've already seen, you've watched the introduction. The presenters done two things. They've said hello to their audience and shown awareness of their audience, and they've introduced the presentation. So they've said things like, good evening everyone, or hello everyone, thanks for coming. And they also say what their presentation's going to be about. So they say things like, today I'm going to talk about, or my presentation is about. The second thing they've done, if the audience are very busy or don't have much time, they might say, I know you're all busy people, but, and then they tell them what they're going to talk about. Or they might say, my presentation's only going to take 10 minutes. And that way you reassure the audience, it's not going to take too long. Now, as soon as your presentation begins, it's very easy for the audience to get lost. That isn't because they don't understand the topic or don't know about the subject. It's probably because you're not giving them the directions they need. And when we present, we talk about signal language. It's like walking down the street and looking at signs or signposts. You need something to tell you where you're going or which way you're turning next. And it's the job of the presenter to give those signals. Now, sometimes presenters think it's obvious, but it isn't obvious. So I'm going to give you quite a few signal phrases that you can use in your presentations. We're going to start by looking at the signal phrases you need very early on in the presentation to tell your audience what you're going to do in your presentation. First of all, I'll talk about its history. Then we'll look at its period of growth in the last 10 years. And finally, we'll look at where we are today and where we're going in the future. And first of all, I'll talk about the key figures. Then I'll talk about some of the details. And finally, I'll talk about what action we need to take. So did you notice there what phrases the presenters used? They were starting the presentation, but they were telling the audience which way they were going to go. So they used signal phrases like, first of all, I'll talk about. Secondly, I'll present to you. And finally, we'll look at. Okay, so we've welcomed the audience, we've introduced our presentation, and we've told them what we're going to talk about, the three main areas. Now you've got to start the main body of your presentation, and in this video, I can't help you with that. You're going to have to find your own words for it. But I can help you with a few phrases just to help your audience through your presentation. You know, those signal phrases to help them step by step. Just watch these extracts and listen out for the language the presenter uses to introduce the three parts. Okay, so first of all, the main stages. Now let's move on to the responsibilities. Okay, and the last thing is key dates. Okay, so did you notice some of the language for moving the presentation on? In a three-part presentation, it's kind of simple because you can say, my first point is, or I'd like to start by talking about, my second point is, next I'd like to talk about, and my final point is, or I'd like to finish by presenting. If you use phrases like that, the audience know when one point's finished and when the next point begins. It also helps with their note-taking as well as their ability to follow your presentation. So first of all, we looked at welcoming the audience and introducing the presentation. Secondly, we looked at signal phrases to tell them what you're going to talk about. And thirdly, we looked at the body of the presentation. But there is one more point I just want to add, and that's how we finish the presentation. Let's see how these presenters do it. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. I do have 5 minutes, so if there are any questions. So that's everything I wanted to say about the launch. Thanks for listening. Are there any questions? Okay, so I think that's everything. I've shown you the figures. You probably have some questions, so I'm happy to take them now. Did you notice how they all ended the presentation? They all announced the end, and then they invited questions. So when you want to tell the audience it's the end of the presentation, you can say things like, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Or, well, that's everything I wanted to say. And then you're probably going to ask the audience if they have any questions. So you just ask them. Just say, are there any questions? Do you have any questions? Or just, any questions? So that brings me to the end of this short video about how to create a presentation. I've given you some phrases for creating a 3-part presentation. Remember, it's not the only way to present, but it's a very safe way if you're doing a presentation for the first time, or if you're doing it in a different language like English. Introducing it, saying what you're going to talk about, moving the audience through with signal phrases, and having a clear ending is a great way to structure a presentation. I'm afraid I can't take any of your questions, but if you do have questions and comments, you could write them below, and look out for future videos from Learning English with Oxford about presenting.